Hello, everyone. Very good evening to all our viewers, and welcome to yet another thought provoking session on Master Speak. Now, the unlocking of economy is now happening at a rapid pace, and going by the hustle bustle on the roads, we seem to be determined to bring wheels on track as they were, so to speak, before March this year. It is now even more important that we continue to follow all the safety precautions for our sake and for the sake of all others we interact with. So, everybody who's tuned in today, give us a thumbs up by pressing the like button if you're doing well and if your loved ones are safe. Tag your friends, don't forget to do that, and tell us from which city are you joining us from today. A guest speaker would love to know which all parts of the country our audience is joining us and tuning into Master Speak session. Lastly, your questions and comments, keep them coming. As you know, out of all the questions that we get, we curate the questions, ask our guest speakers, and at the end of the session, we have two lucky questions who we give the gift voucher to. But you have to stay till the end of the session and make sure that you are there with us throughout the session to know who the lucky winners are. Now, coming to today's session, as we have learned through various sessions that there have been many things that are going to be impacted by this pandemic. And one aspect that this pandemic will have significant bearing on is the workplace itself. Now, it is not just the physical space that I'm talking about, but the whole gamut of workplace dynamics involving space, social interaction, collaboration, and emotional connect. Work will happen from anywhere now with less of face time. And so we need to think about dimensions related to group dynamics as well. Our guest speaker for today, Niven Postma, is joining us from South Africa, and she's going to talk to us about things at office that we don't pay as much attention to as we should be. In fact, I was quite intrigued by the subject when I first spoke to Niven about this topic. Now, Niven is an established leadership, culture, and strategy consultant with clients across many countries and industries as diverse as financial services, professional services, oil and gas, media, and retail, to name a few. She's a visiting lecturer at Henley Business School, and one of the key courses she takes on is Navigating Office Politics. She is also the author of If You Don't Do Politics, Politics Will Do to You, and that's the topic for our conversation today. A very pertinent topic, and many of us don't recognize the positive impact it can have on our relationships with other employees and process at work. So let me thank Niven and hand it over to her now to share her perspectives on the subject. Thank you very much, Niven, for joining us today. All of us are all ears to listen to you.
Thank you, Rakesh, and I'm delighted to be here. I really am. I'm going to quickly share my screen, and then we can get going. Right. There we go. So that should be all set. So as I said, I'm delighted to be here because I've never been to India. I've never had the chance, and hopefully I will have the chance at some point in my life still. But, you know, there is a very large Indian population in South Africa, and people who have been here for generations who originally came out to South Africa as migrant labor. And so, you know, my name, Niven, of course, is a Celtic boy's name, but it is also an Indian name. And so the amount of times that I've had people see my name on an email invitation or a meeting request, and they're fully expecting to see an Indian man, and then suddenly I pitch up. So yeah, I'm really glad to be part of this, and I'm very glad to also hear that your weather is starting to get somewhat cooler, because in the conversations we've been having, it sounds like it's been very hot for you over there. So this topic is one that is close to my heart, and some of the lessons that I'm going to have the chance to teach you today are some of the lessons that I've had to learn in a career that, as you know, was mentioned, has been pretty much across the world and largely at an executive and senior level. And so the very first thing I want to teach you is the following. And so bear with me, because you might be wondering, where am I going with this? But I'll show you in a second. So there are a whole bunch of things in life that are very clear, either ors. You know, it's either the one thing or it's the other thing. So what is the first one? Well, you're either a Coke person or you're a Pepsi person. You are either a person who is incredibly cheerful in the mornings, and the sun starts to rise and the birds start to sing, and so do you, or you are anything but. I am a morning person. I'm irritatingly cheerful in the morning, but don't expect a conversation from me that makes much sense after 9 o'clock at night. And then another one. Look, you either think that 5-day test cricket is one of the most incredible, impressive examples of strategy and skill that exists in sport anywhere in the world, or you don't. And so you might be wondering, am I on the right talk? I thought this was about office politics, and that's pretty much what Rakesh said about 30 seconds ago. Where am I going with this? Well, one of the first things that I want to teach you that no one ever taught me is this idea that we all have, that there's an either or with office politics as well. In other words, you can either be a good person or you can do office politics. Is completely wrong. You may never change from Coke to Pepsi. You may never find 5-day test cricket exciting. But hopefully, at the very least, after the end of my short talk with you today, you will start to understand that office politics and being a good person are not either ors. But I understand why so many of us think that they're either ors. And before I go into some more detail, what I want you to do is just to take a few seconds and to just quietly think what your answer would be to a question that I'm about to ask you. So the question is, what 3 words come to your mind when I say the phrase office politics? So any 3 words, good, bad, ugly, said between gritted teeth, whatever they are. What 3 words? So unfortunately, because we've got such a big audience, I can't do the exercise that I'm about to show you the results of. But if you, watching me, are anything like anybody else that I've ever spoken to, and any other lecture that I've ever given, it really doesn't matter whether you are an executive or just starting out in your career, whether you work in a corporate, whether you work in a charity, whether you are male or female, whether you sit in urban areas or rural areas. Most people, I'd say about 99.9% of people in South Africa, all around the world, when I ask them the same question, 3 words to describe office politics, what they come up with is something that looks pretty much like this. So this is a word cloud that came from a lecture I did last week. It was with about 70 people across the world. And I just want to let you know that they all worked for charities. So these were not people in the cut and thrust that we think corporates are all about. These are people working in the charitable, not-for-profit sector. And these are the words that came up. Toxic is by and large, I'd say about 3/4 of the time, the absolute top word that people use. And so if you've never seen a word cloud, the words that are bigger and bolder are the words that are repeated most often. So if a word's relatively small, it was only mentioned once or twice. But you can see toxic, boring, unpleasant, exhausting, destructive, draining, time-wasting, gossip, bullying. I mean, they are pretty awful words to read, and they go on and on. There is, and some of you may have already seen it, there is one little word that is vaguely positive. I don't know what they meant by excellent. Maybe they just loved rubbing their hands and watching the show of office politics, who knows. But that one little word of excellent in between all of these other words. So the second thing I want to teach you, or at least share with you, is that when you see and when you think about office politics purely as these kinds of things, you are telling yourself a single story of office politics, a terrible story, a truly destructive and pretty awful story of office politics. And like I say, it's not a surprise that we tell ourselves this, because Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, who is at Harvard Business School and has been there, I think, for most of her career, said it really well almost 30 years ago. She said, power and politics are the last dirty secrets of organizations, which means that they are not things that nice people talk about, and they are certainly not the things that nice people teach or get taught. So, I mean, it's hardly a surprise. We've got this terrible single story. And then we read things and we watch TV and we speak to friends about their career and their career experiences. And the story can just get worse and worse and worse. And so I've put together a short video clip for those of you who have watched House of Cards on Netflix. You'll know that Kevin Spacey plays Frank Underwood. So he's trying in House of Cards to become President of the United States. He is Vice President. And between this word cloud and the video clip I'm going to show you, I think we start to get an idea of what people generally think about office politics. So have a quick look at this clip.
And the butchery begins. Any pugilist worth his salt knows when someone's on the ropes. That's when you throw a combination to the gut and a left hook to the jaw. In Gaffney, we had our own brand of diplomacy. Shake with your right hand, but hold a rock in your left. The road to power is paved with hypocrisy and casualties. Never regret. There are two types of vice presidents, doormats and matadors. Which do you think I intend to be? The only thing more satisfying than convincing someone to do what I want is failing to persuade them on purpose. From the lion's den to a pack of wolves, when you're fresh meat, kill and throw them something fresher. Every kitten grows up to be a cat. They seem so harmless at first, small, quiet, lapping up their saucer of milk. But once their claws get long enough, they draw blood, sometimes from the hand that feeds them. For those of us climbing to the top of the food chain, there can be no mercy. There is but one rule: hunt or be hunted.
Well, okay. I mean, if the word cloud didn't depress you, then that video clip, I'm sure, did. Hunt or be hunted, fresh meat, hypocrisy. Well, of course, we've got this idea of either a good person or I play politics. But the third thing I want to tell you that I had to learn, and like I said, no one ever taught me, is that your definition, if it's like this, my definition of office politics, which was very much like this, I was completely allergic to the idea of office politics. Any mention of it, and I just rolled my eyes and said, do me a favor. I'm here to do my job, not to get involved in that nonsense. The thing that nobody ever taught me is that my understanding of office politics was actually completely wrong. I thought office politics were the words that you mentioned on the word cloud and that the other delegates mentioned. I thought office politics was this kind of stuff. Lo and behold, this is the actual definition of office politics. The informal, unofficial, sometimes behind the scenes efforts that all of us engage in, people in all organizations engage in, to do all kinds of things, to sell your idea, to influence people, to increase your power. And if you look at that, two things have struck people when I've shared this definition. One, somebody said to me in a lecture, but if that's the definition, I mean, we even have politics in our families. Of course, we're going to have them in companies. And I said, well, good luck with your family. But yes, I think we can all relate. The second thing is that definition is completely neutral. No one says anything about toxic there. No one says anything about destructive, damaging, bullying, time wasting, all the things that came up in the word cloud. It's neutral. Which by definition means that if it's neutral, of course you can have bad politics. And bad politics are the kinds of things that people generally talk about when they talk about politics. The backstabbing, the abuse, the exploitation, people's careers and sometimes their whole lives that are destroyed by politics. But that's not the whole story. There is a whole other story from this completely neutral definition. And that's the story of good politics, positive politics, effective politics. And it's a story we never tell ourselves because we never hear it. We only hear the single story. And the reality is that it actually does not matter where you go. As Rakesh said, I lecture in South Africa, but I also lecture around the world. And it does not matter which organization you're in, which sector you are in, at what level you are, the organization that you are part of will have politics, whether you're the boss or the subordinate. So it's not, as the quote says, whether organizations will have politics, but what kind of politics they will have. And so let me give you some examples. I have a friend who was a church minister, so she led a congregation for about 10 years and really enjoyed being a minister. But after 10 years of being a priest, decided, look, I think it's time for a change. So she decided to change into a corporate role because she had originally studied to be an accountant and wanted to actually practice that. Yeah, she is an interesting woman, an accountant priest, but that's another story. So she wanted to get into corporate. And the one thing that made her very nervous about going into a traditional corporate was all of these discussions that she'd heard from friends of hers about how damaging and terrible and unendurable office politics are in corporates. And so she was quite nervous about all of this. But then she said she joined the company that she did, and she said it was no better or worse than any other company. It was a nice company, it was not a perfect company. And she said all of a sudden, after about 3 months, she was looking at all of her colleagues saying, you guys are kidding me, right? You're talking about corporate politics as though they're the worst things you can possibly deal with in your career. Let me tell you a thing or two about church politics. And I have a friend who is an academic at a university, also been an academic, a visiting academic at some of the major universities around the world. And he says, Niv, the fights in academic institutions and universities are so vicious because the stakes are so low. I've worked in charities, good people, wanting to do good things in the world and in very, very desperate and vulnerable communities. We still had politics, even with the best intentions in the world, because people are people. And this is just how we show up when we get together in a group. So they are unavoidable, they are inevitable, you are going to find them wherever you go. And for some of you, this might be really good news, because you're suddenly thinking, oh, maybe where I am is not so bad. But for some of you, it might be devastating news, because you may have had this fantasy that one day I am going to find that place where there are no politics. And I'm sorry to have to burst your bubble. That place does not exist. And if it does exist, no one has found it yet from Harvard Business School or anywhere else. So as much as that is the third truth, that politics are inevitable, the fourth truth is they exist on a spectrum. Okay? So you're never going to escape them, but you are going to find more and less politicized environments. I've already said you can find bad politics, no question. None of us are naive enough to think that that doesn't exist. Of course it exists. But you can also and must also find and practice positive politics. And so within that, you also have the spectrum of the degree to which things happen because of the informal, because of the unofficial, because of the behind the scenes. And in minimally politicized environments, yes, that makes things run. But in highly politicized environments, that's the only thing that pretty much makes things run. And I gave a lecture a few weeks ago to a bunch of investment bankers. And the more we talked about this and the more they understood what politics are and how much bigger the subject is than just the understanding that they'd had. One of the investment bankers after a few hours said, you know what, I don't think that this bank would run if it were not for office politics. That's how we get things done. Never mind the formal committees, it's the informal where things really happen. So that can happen to a greater or lesser degree. And really, that's normal. That's just something you're going to have to accept. Where it's not normal, and where I urge you not to accept it, is the moment you get into a pathologically politicized environment. A truly toxic environment. And I have been in a toxic environment, thank heavens, only once in my career. But let me tell you, it was one of the worst times, not just of my career, but of my life. Because, often, inevitably, we don't just leave work at work. We bring it home, and especially now when work is at home. And so when I say toxic, I'm not talking about somebody that you don't particularly like, or somebody that irritates you, or having a bad day or a bad week at work. I'm talking about something that is actually abusive. It has all the hallmarks of an abusive relationship. And so let me give you an example of what truly toxic can be. The person that I worked for, I went out and bought this book, Snakes in Suits, after working for him, because I thought I have to understand what was going on here. This was before I understood more about office politics. And so this character was so destructive. I had a colleague who, within the space of 18 months, had 3 heart attacks. 3 heart attacks at the age of 47, and put it all down to this bloke. I had another colleague who went in to have a meeting with him, came out, and within a few minutes had a stroke. And no one knows what happened in that meeting, because he actually lost a portion of his cognitive function, which meant he lost a portion of his memory. That's toxic. And I often spend a chunk of time talking about this. For now, I'm just going to touch on it and touch on the advice that I now give, which I learned very personally in that situation, and which has been confirmed by all of the research that I've done subsequently to try to understand the dynamics in a toxic environment. And the advice is really 3 words. Run like crazy. Get out now. Save yourself. Whatever 3 words you want to use, those are the best 3 words I can give you. And I tried in my situation everything. I went to the CEO, who I knew personally, 3 times. I went to a coach thinking that if I can't fix the situation, I should try to fix myself. In summary, my experience and all the research says you are not going to change a fundamentally abusive relationship. It is going to take a serious toll on your health, both physical, emotional, and mental. And to stay is going to take a toll on you that you might tell yourself is not happening. It is happening. And so all of us have to make decisions around what we can accept and what we can't, and what we need to do to support our family and ourselves. Please, if you're in a toxic environment, think very carefully about what it's going to do to you by staying. So that's toxic environment. For the rest, like I said, it's part of being in organizations, it's part of being human, and it's here to stay. And so I want you to also think now for a few seconds. I've told you that politics are probably not what you thought they were. I've told you that there are versions of politics that are good and bad. I've told you that they exist on a spectrum. I've told you that it's not about being either a good person or playing politics. You can be a very good person and play very good politics. So with those things, if you think about politics, be it the bad politics that you may have seen albeit the good politics that you're now suddenly starting to call good politics because you understand it differently. Whatever version of politics you're thinking about, take a few seconds and think about the people who play politics well. And maybe you're one of those people. You just never realized it. What are they able to achieve? What are some of the things they manage to get done because they are so good at politics? Because they are so good at this informal, unofficial, behind the scenes set of activities. Okay. So I don't know what your answers were, but this was a question that was asked in some research. And these were some of the answers that I think about 3,000 people who were asked in the United States the same question. This is what they said. All of these things, if you look at them, are also neutral. There's nothing good or bad, ethical or unethical, moral or immoral about getting projects moved up a priority list. There are always going to be priorities. Are you going to be at the bottom of the list or the top? How you get to the top? Yes, you can play bad politics to do that, but you can also play good politics. Bypassing normal procedures. I'm not talking about criminal activity. I'm not talking about breaking the law or breaking the rules or something that's truly underhanded and unacceptable. But we all know there are very particular ways that you have to do things in organizations because that's what the rule says. And there are always ways around it if you want to be quicker and get things done and people want to help you do that. And so the list goes on. So these are all, I think you would agree, incredibly valuable skills to have, incredibly valuable things to achieve in your career, not just for yourself, but for your team that's counting on you, for your colleagues, for your organization as a whole. And so it's probably no surprise that there are studies after studies after studies that have shown when it comes to your career success, it's not your sparkling personality. It's not your academic qualifications. It's not your technical skills that are going to predict how successful you're going to be in every job you have and therefore collectively over your career. It is your political intelligence. It is your ability to navigate and build the relationships that are the informal and unofficial and to use them appropriately and to your benefit. And similarly, all kinds of research, one of which I quote in my book from the Center for Conscious Leadership, the single biggest reason why executive careers, and in their case it was executives, but it happens all across the levels of an organization. The single biggest reason why people's careers derail and go whoop over a cliff just when they were looking like they were doing very well is because they don't have those skills. They don't want to develop those skills. They think all kinds of things, including that my work will speak for itself. And I'll get to that in a bit more detail now. But before I do that, let me read you a quote from the Cass Business School, which I liked so much that I put it in the book. And again, it speaks of executives. It's true at all levels. Executives are smart people, but they can often be remarkably stupid. Too often, they assume problems can be solved with superior analytical abilities. This means they spend their time trying to come up with the best technical solution. However, these technically perfect results often run into stiff opposition and eventually get dropped, so often in favor of an inferior solution. This can be disastrous. It can mean good ideas get shelved, talented managers become frustrated and unmotivated, and organizations get weighed down. Why does this happen? We think the reason behind this is many organizations convince themselves that analytical ability is the only thing that matters. But what is still too often overlooked is political intelligence. This is the understanding, as I've said, of how power and politics work in an organization. And so this is the fifth truth. It's all politics. It would be fabulous to live in a world, to work for an organization where my talent was enough and my hard work spoke for itself. That's not this world. That's not most organizations. And so ideally, yes, you're talented. Ideally, you are smart and you work really hard. But if you think that that is enough, you are making a major mistake and you are running major risks with your job performance and your career success. And as I've said before, not just for yourself, but for your team, for your organization. It's all politics. It's all people. And so, you might be thinking, yeah, well, that was true. And Rakesh said it at the beginning, things feel like they're starting to come back to normal. And so all of the stuff about office politics may have been true when we were all in the office, but for months now, across the world, offices have looked kind of like this. And offices have been dining rooms and kitchens and children's bedrooms. And I was on a call the other day, an office was even the bathroom because it was the only place where this woman could get some peace from her kids. So offices are not offices like we used to. Surely then, by definition, well, how can we be worrying about office politics if we're not in an office? Surely they've disappeared. No. Even though we are all working in all kinds of places, doing all kinds of things. And whether that's going to stay or change, is still an open debate and question. But even though that has changed, office politics are actually even more important in a remote working environment. And I love this quote because it's absolutely true. And it reinforces the point that I made around it's all politics. You make a huge mistake if you treat work like school, if you focused purely on the technical part of your job, because of course a big part of your job is the technical delivery. But the other enormous part is the relational side of things. And so many times people think, the relational, the political, the influencing, all of that kind of stuff. No, man, I don't have time for it. It's a distraction from my real job because my real job is the technical. That's never been true. It's even less true now. The relational matters even more now because we are virtual, because the chance for serendipitous, random conversations, random connections has completely disappeared. And one of the things that people make as a mistake when it comes to work is another great quote I want to read you, all about relationships. There comes a time in your career as you move up when critical relationships simply have to work. When you are in school, if you don't like a particular classmate, that's fine. Don't hang out with the person. Don't even talk to them if you don't want to. But if you are both senior people in an organization, in a relationship that inevitably requires a high degree of interdependence, you cannot afford to not like the other person. And how many times I've seen people, I don't like them, I don't need them, I don't have to engage with them. I'm not saying like them, but if you need them to get your stuff done, if you need them to be on your side to make things happen, you need to make that relationship work. You don't have to have them over to your home. You don't have to be friends with them. But to think that you can just disregard them means that you're going right back to when we were all at school. And it is a major mistake. The other thing is, I don't know how many calls you've been on, but people have become invisible. They don't get dressed for Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams calls because, hey, we're living the dream. We're not commuting. We're not fighting in the traffic. We're not having to deal with that colleague that irritates the life out of us. So I can get onto the Zoom call 20 seconds before it starts, and I can just be this circle with my initials. That is doing unbelievably bad things to your personal brand. And we all have a personal brand. We all stand for something, and people work from that assumption of who we are. And so this idea that people feel they don't have to worry about the relational because they're not in the office, They can be invisible, and that's not going to impact and affect things. Big mistake. Big mistake. So one of the best, not so much pieces of advice, but observations that I ever heard in my career was this one. Some of the most important decisions of your career are going to be made when you are not in the room. So who is in the room for you? And what are they saying? Again, we're not in the room. Now we're not even in the building. But those relationships and what people say for you and about you when these decisions are hanging over your head, these opportunities have the potential to come to you or bypass you completely, are critical. And they are becoming even more critical now. The other thing about online working and remote working is, again, piles of research that says conflict has a tendency to escalate way quicker in online working relationships, and it stays escalated for a lot longer than it normally would in real life. And I mean, we can all relate to that. You see people saying things on Facebook or on any kind of social media platform that they would really struggle to say to a person's face. If your traffic is anything like our traffic, you know, the things that people say to each other yelling out the windows when they get angry is very different to what you would say to somebody, even if it's a stranger, if you had to meet them face to face. So this whole social disintermediation of electronic communication, the whole social disinhibition effect, means that we are pressing send way too quickly. Tone does not carry in email or WhatsApp. We are misunderstanding each other. And that conflict, like I say, escalates. And it stays escalated. Now, if, as I said, political intelligence is all about your relationships that help you access things and get things done, I mean, no prizes for figuring out what conflict is going to do to those relationships. It's going to fray them and potentially destroy them. And the fewer relationships and the fewer people you have on your side, the more isolated you become. The more isolated you become, the less political capital you have. The less political capital you have, the less you can get done. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. And the last thing is all kinds of research we're seeing in South Africa. I'm seeing globally. I don't know about India. But depression and anxiety have been on the rise for years in organizations. Because of the pressures, because of the stresses in organizations, outside of organizations. And the loneliness that so many people are talking about that have come from COVID, that comes from a place where, yeah, there might be colleagues that really irritate you, but there are also colleagues that support you and nurture you and make you feel better when you're having a really bad day. That has disappeared for a lot of people, and for a lot of people remains completely absent from what they're able to do. And the more lonely people are, the more they struggle to deliver. And again, the vicious cycle starts, because the more I struggle to deliver, the more the relationships suffer, which means I struggle to deliver, and so it goes on. So it was Bill Clinton who said in his 1992 presidential campaign, "It's the economy, stupid." When it comes to politics, when it comes to being effective in your career and using politics, the informal and unofficial relationships that make things happen, all I can say is, it's the people. It's always the people, stupid. And I was very stupid about this for a very long time in my career. And I had a very successful, very senior career. I've been an executive for over 20 years. These things matter. And some of them, I wish I had known earlier. I wish somebody had told me some of the truths that I only learned the hard way. So in closing, here's a short clip.
What is the most inspiring thing I ever said to you?
Don't be an idiot. Changed my life. Whenever I'm about to do something, I think, would an idiot do that? And if they would, I do not do that thing.
So that's my advice. Don't be an idiot. Don't tell yourself the single story about politics, which is actually only the single story of bad politics. don't buy into this very widespread but completely mistaken idea that you can either be a good person or you can do politics. And for heaven's sake, do not be an idiot and think that your fabulous work will be enough. If that's what you think, you are back in the schoolroom. You are back in the classroom. And what a pity, because we need people, more and more people in organizations to get things done there. Because heaven knows a lot of organizations need a lot of help. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, thank you very much, Niven. It's quite an informative session there. Clearly an inevitable subject. Everyone experiences it, but it never gets discussed openly, or it's always discussed with a negative connotation.
Yes.
And I think it's an interesting fact there that, office politics is not restricted to office, but wherever people are. And I
Yes.
like what you said that biggest decision about you are made when you're not in the room. I think it's very apt indeed. So a very, very interesting and intriguing session as I was expecting it to be, Niven. Thank you very much for that. Now, Niven, you made a very good case for embracing this truth about organizational politics. My first question to you before I sort of go to our audience and pick their questions is, uh, I'm sure you've sort of espoused that in your book, but can you give us a sort of a condensed framework from your book, that you can share with us on how to navigate it successfully now that you know it's an important one to deal with? What would
Yeah.
be your sort of a mantra, if I can say, for people who are watching us?
So I think there's always three things that I ask people to get their heads around, Rakesh. The first thing is what I've hoped to achieve in the talk. So an awareness that there's so much more to the subject than you realize. And that awareness is not an insignificant awareness given the single story we've all had for so long. The second thing is an assessment. And so there are all kinds of assessments around the kinds of things that make you show up well politically or not. There are some in my book. You don't have to buy the book. They're available for free on my website. So assess yourself. How are you doing when it comes to networking skills? How are you doing when it comes to your stakeholders? When it comes to using your power, knowing whether you have power, using your leverage in a situation, engaging with people from a win-win point of view rather than I'm going to win and you're going to lose. These are all the skills that really stand you in good stead. And so assess yourself against these skills. And if you are closer to where you want to be, fabulous. If you are very far away from where you think you should be, and suddenly it's starting to make sense as to why you're not as effective as you think you should have been in your career, well, then that's when you start to take action. And actually not just now, but for the rest of your career, because these are skills. Networking, relationships, building your power, managing the perceptions that people have of you, managing the influence that you have and building it to your advantage. These are lifelong skills. The same as future Generali India. You have a brand which you will build and have built for years. It's a continual work in progress. The same with you as a person and the brand that you have and how you use it for political gain. So that in summary. I don't know if that's enough, Rakesh.
Oh, fair enough, Niven. I'm sure that's good enough for us to go and grab the book and get to know more about what you've said. But that's very useful, Niven. I'm going to jump into the questions that our audience have asked, and I think this talks to things that you spoke of about culture. So the first question is from Rajat Tripathi, and he wants to know that how do you identify what kind of politics do we have in our organization, and is it not the same thing as culture is?
Yeah.
Like you build a culture, a positive culture, and therefore you have positive politics. Isn't the same thing that we're talking about?
So that's a lovely question. And yes, they are very inextricably linked, right? My last position before I decided I wanted to work for myself, I never wanted to fill in a leave form ever again, was as head of culture and leadership for the Standard Bank Group, which is the largest bank by assets in Africa. And so I had to look at, what is the culture of this group? Is there a group culture across 26 countries? And what does that mean relative to what we're trying to do strategically? Do they reinforce each other, or do they actually cancel each other out? And so culture at its heart, there's plenty of definitions, but the most commonly used one is the way we do things around here. So absolutely, how politics gets played is an expression of the culture. It's an expression of how we do things around here. Is everything behind the scenes and informal, or is only a fraction of it? That said, though, as with culture, as with political cultures, so you will always have subcultures. Subcultures in an organization that are positive, subcultures that are really, really unpleasant and toxic, and a whole bunch that are somewhere in between. It's the same with political environments. You will generally get a kind of overarching, overall political culture, but you will inevitably get sub-political cultures that are better or worse than the overall culture. So yes, they are very inextricably linked because, as politics, same as with culture. It's all about people, it's all about leadership, and it's all about the things that leaders demonstrate and that leaders tolerate. And that sets the tone for an entire organization.
Great, thank you, Niven. The next question is from Shiv and Shiv Tripathi here, and the question that Shiv has is that how should organizations use office politics to drive productivity and better outcome amongst employees? So can you actually, if you're a leader in the organization, can you actually spin it in your favor and drive people to do more, achieve more?
Yes, absolutely. Because look, if you are good at politics, whether you are good at bad politics or good at good politics, being good at politics gives you a whole bunch of things. Because you have access to information that comes out through the informal channels, you generally get access to information first. So what's going on, what priorities are, what might be about to happen. You also get access to opportunities before other people do. And I can see that in my career, where one of the key things that make you good at politics is your network. And Rakesh, I haven't looked for a job since my very first one. Every single other job has come to me through my network. So yes, I'm good at what I do, but a lot of people are. I have a network that I've given to and gotten from, and that's allowed me to do a whole bunch of stuff that I wouldn't otherwise have had the opportunity to do. So this access to information, this access to opportunities, this access to power to get things done, these are all things that if they are used positively and productively, are inevitably going to make you more efficient. Well, make you more productive. More efficient, that's another question. But absolutely, they are not just single things. They are not just for your own benefit. They're for a team's benefit. They're for an organization's benefit. And that just reminds me, last week when I gave a lecture, one of the women really struggled with the idea that there could be positive politics. Until I suddenly said to her, but think of somebody that you have admired in your career. And she said, yes. And she suddenly realized part of the reason why she admired this person was because they used the informal politics so effectively for their benefit and for her benefit as a member of their team. And similarly, there was a manager that she had that she really, really liked, thought this person was wonderful. But after 6 months, said, I can't work for her anymore because she's so busy being by the book and not engaging in the politics that actually all of the opportunities that we could be having come our way, all the support that we need to have to deliver what we need to, is also disappearing because she's not getting people on her side. So no question, politics will make a team a lot more effective. It will make the leader and manager of that team hugely more effective, both in how they are perceived upwards and in how they are able to support downwards.
After listening to you, Niven, I can't help but think about this conversation I had with a friend of mine. He said that, in our office, there is absolutely no politics. And I thought I was a positive statement, but now after listening to you, I'm saying that I need to go back to him and tell him there's something seriously wrong with your organization if you have no politics,
Or
because there is
otherwise,
always positive politics.
yes. Maybe what he meant, Rakesh, is there's no bad politics. We're all above board, we say what we think. But if there's no politics, tell him to write to Harvard Business School. They'll want to write a book on him.
Yeah. Okay, so shout out to our audience. We've got 10 minutes more with Niven. Please keep your questions coming. I've got a bunch of questions here. 2 lucky questions will be announced at the end of the show as lucky winners. So this question, next one, Niven, I was expecting a specific question, and we've actually got more than one. So I'm just going to merge these questions and ask you that this question is from Javed primarily. And this is about, Javed wants to know, how do you manage interpersonal conflict, especially when you're working in a remote environment, when you're not able to meet or interact face to face? So how do you manage the situation, especially when it's an exaggerated escalation?
Yeah.
Right? So we have these situations, and how do you diffuse it? How do you navigate your way through that?
Yeah. Look, so 2 things I would say based on what I'm seeing. The first, as with conflict, as with so many things in life, prevention is better than cure. And so what I mean by that is the best leaders and managers that I'm seeing are spending an inordinate amount of time checking in on their people, scheduling things where they say there's no agenda. Everyone bring a glass of wine, because in South Africa, we're big wine drinkers. Bring a glass of wine or a cup of coffee. We're just going to chat to each other for an hour. How are things going? So they're talking individually to people. They're also getting the groups together. And rather than, like I say, seeing this as a distraction from the real work, which is the output, they are seeing it as an even more critical part of the work for them as leaders and managers. And, I don't think COVID and remote working has caused dysfunctions in teams. In my experience, mostly, if a team is dysfunctional, it will become more dysfunctional in a remote working environment. That's not always true. It's not universally true, but generally, if there are cracks that are already there, they will start to get even more visible and even more serious in a remote environment. If there are no cracks and people are making every effort to keep away from the cracks, that's the best place to start. That said, though, sometimes you don't know what you don't know and things can just explode. In my experience, the best thing to do is to nip it in the bud as quickly as possible. So the moment that you become aware of it, how tempting is it to just stick your head in the sand and wish that it would go away? It doesn't. It does just get worse. And in my experience, that nipping in the bud often involves some honest feedback. And how few of us are actually good at honest feedback, timely feedback, helpful feedback. And helpful feedback doesn't have to be positive. It just needs to be useful. And one of the best frameworks I've ever seen, and I've used it for years, especially when I can see that I'm being triggered or I can see that other people are being triggered, is a fabulous one that really requires you to do 3 things. When you give feedback to somebody, the first thing you do is you say, when you did this. So what was the specific action that you're giving feedback on, or specific set of actions? When you did this, I felt. Did you feel angry? Did you feel irritated? Did you feel annoyed? Whatever your emotion was, own your own emotion rather than putting your emotion on the other person. So when you did this, I felt this. And the third part is because the story that I am telling myself is. And in my experience, I have found that such a valuable way to give feedback, because so many times we just throw our conclusions and our accusations at people. We know exactly why they're exaggerating the conflict. I mean, the term has already been used. The conflict is exaggerated. So there's all kinds of assumptions and all kinds of conclusions. And quite frankly, you wouldn't be human if you didn't jump to assumptions and conclusions about other people. We do it. We all do it. This is a framework that I have personally found really helpful to just separate out, what did the person do? What am I feeling that is my responsibility? And what is the story that I'm telling myself about them? And you know what? If the story changes, my feeling can change. in my experience, it's a much more useful way of giving feedback, especially when tempers are escalated and conflict is high.
Very useful, Niven, indeed. I'm sure, Javed, you found that extremely useful and practical suggestion there. Niven, the next question is similar to what Javed just asked. This one is from Ninad. Now, if that someone is your boss, right, how do you deal with the situation? How do you get your boss to recognize your work and knowing that your boss is possibly the one who's playing politics or doing, bad politics? Now, you've given us an answer. If it's a psychopath, there are three-word answer. But if that's not the case, how do you get your boss to realize and see the positive in you?
Yeah. So so let's assume your boss is not a snake in a suit, is not a raving psychopath. I think the first thing you need to do is to get out of the trap of thinking that your work will speak for itself. So I've covered that. I'm not going to cover that again. The second thing the second thing I'd suggest is, so many times when we talk about performance management and being managed, we understandably talk about being managed downwards. And often in lectures, I'll say to people, okay, if you've had somebody who has been a good manager, or if you're in a situation where you are praying to finally one day have a good manager, what does a good manager look like? What do they do or not do that makes you feel that they are managing you well? And the answers, vary, but they generally boil down to, well, they know me, they know what matters to me, they want to see me develop in this role and beyond that, they give me opportunities, they support me, they have my back, especially when things go wrong. I know that they're on my side. Again, that doesn't mean I can get away with murder and that they won't give me negative feedback when it's warranted. But I feel like we're in this together and they are looking out for me. And I suppose all of us can relate to that, because when I've had managers do that for me as well, it's a fabulous feeling. But what I ask people is, and how many times do you give those same things upwards? Make the person that you are working for feel like you are on their side. Know what matters to them in terms of perception, in terms of relationships, in terms of delivery, in terms of their career. And help them understand and let them see that you care about delivering that for them as much as you care about delivering what you need to do for yourself. And so let me be really clear here. I am not saying manipulate. I'm not saying, ingratiate and being a sycophant in front of a boss and doing things that really are quite nauseating. What I am talking about is being very deliberate and knowing that your boss is the person who has the single biggest determinant on your career and your life right now. And so how are you managing that relationship so that that person genuinely feels, sees, and understands that you're in this together, that you are on their side, and that you will give them the feedback that they need sometimes, but that they can count on you and they can trust you. Like I say, sometimes, actually often, it's a revelation because we want that and we assume and expect that downwards from managers. We don't often think that managers and leaders above us might need and want and really value the same thing. So those are the two bits of advice I'd give.
Great. Again, very useful, Niven. I think, before I ask you this next question, just a point here that culturally we are very submissive to authority, right? And even at the workplace, we see a lot of people want to say things, but are not able to say things when you're faced with authority. And this will raise hell if you are an introvert, right? So the question Sundar has is that how should somebody who's introvert by nature, not very, very expressive and outspoken, how does that person sort of navigate his or way through office politics?
So that's a lovely question. And listen, I get this question asked in every country. It may be more marked, or there's a sense that it's more marked in India. There are introverts everywhere, all around the world, who struggle with this. So there's a couple of things that I would say. If at the heart of politics, it's all about relationships, then actually there's a whole bunch of evidence that shows that introverts are better networkers and better relationship builders than extroverts. Which might surprise you because you think, we've got this picture of this gregarious extrovert who's going out and making contacts and handing out business cards to anybody who will take them. But actually, evidence shows that introverts nurture their relationships far more. They have fewer, yes, because they are by definition introverts. But they nurture and take care of those relationships a lot better. They invest in them, and in investing, they reap the dividends. So the fact that you are an introvert, not a problem, not an issue. And there's also a fabulous book that I always suggest to introverts called Quiet by Susan Cain. She has a TED Talk as well. It's a good TED Talk. Her book is superb. She was a lawyer on Wall Street and a deep, deep self-confessed introvert. And she thought, what is wrong with me and how am I ever going to navigate being a corporate lawyer when I'm such a deep introvert? And so this book is the result of years of research. And the subtitle of the book is, so the title is Quiet. The subtitle is The Power of Introverts in a World That Cannot Stop Talking. And so what she makes the case very compellingly for is there's power in being able to use your introversion, because when you say things, people generally listen because you're not talking all the time. The third person I'd recommend, who also writes fabulous books, she has a whole bunch of Harvard Business Review blogs and articles, is a woman called Dory Clark. And she is also a self-confessed introvert, but has been repeatedly voted one of the top 50 thinkers in the world and has built a very extensive network and talks about office politics and lectures on it as well. And she's got some fantastic books and articles as to how, as an introvert, you can network. And like I said, they all come from her personal experience. So those are 3 bits of advice that I'd give.
Superb, Niven. That brings me to the last question for the show today. What would be your advice to a lot of our audience, as I mentioned to you earlier, are either early in their career or they're even freshers, right? So how would you advise them, when they are taking this step forward over the next few years, trying to build their career? What would be your advice for them to work in a way that would help them achieve the career success that they're looking for?
Yeah. Well, Rakesh, I cannot tell you how many times people who are in their late 30s, 40s, 50s who have attended my lectures have said, if I had only known this at the beginning of my career, if I had only known this, I would not have made some of the mistakes that I made. I would have taken a whole bunch more opportunities, because instead of being completely allergic to office politics, I would have recognized the inevitability and I would have gotten smart about how to use them for my own advantage. So if you are at the beginning of your career, fantastic. You're learning things that most of us only learned 20 years into our career. And again, I think there's a 3-stage thing. 1, be aware how important they are, how inevitable they are, and what kind of a difference they are going to make to your career success if you get them right, and what kind of damage they're going to do to your career if you don't get them right. Have that awareness and don't lose it for the rest of your career. And the second thing is then, okay, so how am I doing? Again, I'm not trying to push my book. The exercises are on the website for free. You can download a whole workbook where you assess yourself and you then also craft your political strategy. What am I going to need to do now? Because what you're going to need to do now might be very different to what you needed to do 6 months ago or in a year's time. The context always changes. The priorities always change. So what's your political strategy right now? And there's a set of questions that I take you through. And based on your answers, the third step is start doing something about it. Take it as seriously as you take the rest of your career. Take it as seriously as you take your technical and academic skills, as opposed to thinking, like I said earlier, it's a distraction from your real work. For the rest of your career, know that this is as much your real work as the technical stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Niven. That's all the time we have for today. It was such a pleasure to have you on this show. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom so openly with our audience. I'm sure all of us who are listening in to you today found this session extremely useful.
Good. Well,
Thank
I
you so much for
absolutely
joining us.
loved it. Thank you.
Sorry, you were saying, okay, I think we, okay. So that brings us to the end of the show. Time for me to pick two lucky winners. So I've got them slotted here. The first one is Rima Sathi for asking question on interpersonal conflict, and the second one is Ridhima, who asked the last question that if I'm a fresher, how do I really go about building my career, knowing that office politics is inevitable? Thank you very much, Ridhima, and thank you very much, Rima, for asking these questions. Please send us your email ID so we can ship the voucher to you. And to everyone else, thank you very much for tuning in, listening to us. Before I sign off, like always, I have to thank our community support partners, Resulticks, Adgully, Paul Writer, Netcore, and Shoolini University. And a big shout out and a thank to our knowledge support partner, etbrandequity.com. Thank you very much for being with us, guys, and to all our audience for listening in and supporting us all this while. Wish you all the best. Stay safe, stay healthy.